stems from a line of Macedonian Greek. She is actually, the Ptolemy family were Greeks who began marrying Macedonian princesses. And then there's actually a very long history of incest in their culture and in their tradition in order to keep it pure, kind of. So within these depictions, it's another, actually, something that I could also concentrate on if I were to further my research and looking at these images and how these images seem to claim specific, claim her to be a part of ethnic or cultural identity, such as the Rixon's piece. If you really look at it closely, she's portrayed extremely pale, while her maidservants are not. There's a direct contrast there, and it's interesting because it seems like this Western society is claiming her identity to be a part of their own. However, they're still problematizing her. She's still a very problematic identity. So there's this, even beyond the sexuality of her, there's this need to, or this feeling to be attracted as well as repelled. So there's an attraction to claim her, and then through claiming her to problemize her. And it's this really interesting tension that kind of gets created in her identity, and how she's reinterpreted and reinvented. And it's something that I'd actually like to look into if I had time. Mm-hmm.
I had a follow-up question to Professor Ochoa's, and I'm sorry I didn't hear your presentation, but I did hear part of the second and then the third. So, there's different ways of thinking about representation, and you were talking about depiction or portrayal, but I wanted to see if you could respond to another way of thinking about representation as standing in for, and bringing those two together. These images, that you're talking about, representation, stand in for and portray, and maybe we could talk about, like, what is it that they stand in for, and what is it that they tell us about the social reality?
To respond to that, especially within the research that I was looking at, Cleopatra actually does stand in for something. The prejudice and connected to her identity and the stereotypes connected to her identity through the ancient propaganda actually creates this idea of she stands in for the overall problematic woman. She's a woman in power, and because of her iconic figure, they are able to kind of reinvent her as a symbol that stands for women's power and then problematizes it. You guys want to respond to this one also?
Go ahead. I agree with what Jamie said, because there was a few articles that I was reading in which they asked Galindo about her body and what she does, and she said it was a global body. And I think in mainstream images of just women and how they're depicted in general, they are portrayed and represent for a global population. I mean, depending on which, but a general idea of who that woman is in relation to that population or society as a whole. So, I mean, it would really depend, but I think it's very global, and one person can represent not only one society, but the world in general, females or males.
So I can't really talk about the actual participants in my study, but the telenovela Sin Tetas No Hay Paraíso, the main character, Catalina, I feel like she stands in for a lot of women who obviously do feel insecure about their bodies because they compare themselves to other women or other bodies that are, I guess, are eroticized, like in the media. So throughout the whole show, it's following Catalina and just her. You can tell how she has low self-esteem and how she feels like less of a person because she doesn't have like what she considers to be the essential part of her body, which is big breasts. So I feel like that not only relates to people within that country in Colombia, but that can be also a worldwide thing where women all over the world, or maybe more specifically even in this country, where we oftentimes feel the need to change our bodies and to be dissatisfied with the way that we look because we are comparing ourselves to other mainstream ideas of what beautiful, feminine, sexy women bodies are. So, yeah, I don't know. I think that's it.
I really like what both you guys said. But I wanted to add that kind of what this has made me think about is the idea that an image can stand where when you look at one image of like a woman in a magazine, say it's not like an extremely famous person, so it's not someone that you can readily identify, you don't question, oh, who is this person? You don't think about the individual. Rather, they start to stand as a collective of what it should be. And I think that's kind of exactly what you guys were getting at. So I just wanted to try clarifying a little bit.
I would like to go back to the first question as well. And I'm not sure I have a question in addition to add to that, but maybe some suggestions, and they are addressed to everybody, not only the speakers, because I think one issue that you were bringing up was how can we have an impact? This is a word that you also used the last presentation. How can we make a difference through what we do, which is what artists are blessed with, because they can have more visibility and both make people sing or make them have emotional reactions or whatever. And as an instructor, I often feel I'm trying to do the same, but I'm not sure how successful I am. But then students get interested in these subjects and they continue their research and they go out to the world. And one way to think about the impact is not only through our research, but also how we, in our personal lives, then interact with other people based on what we know and what we learn. So I think this whole panel here and the whole program is a way of making an impact and carrying it forward. And I think you now understand maybe better the questions that we are raising, and you will carry them forward. And I see that you are all women talking about the position of women. So my wish is that the men who are in this gathering, especially the students, will also be attracted to these issues and want to think about them and do something about them. So I don't know if you have any other thoughts on this.
You guys have anything? Okay. So I talked to you a little bit about this earlier, but within my research, there's one thing that I, especially in my presentation, I actually took it out because of lack of time, and really there was no answer. It was just kind of to prompt thought, really. And that is, in the modern context, does the modern audience really want to be more of a viewer or a voyeur? So how do we go about looking at things? And not only how do we go about looking at things, but what exactly do we choose to look at? And I think that's what it comes down to, what really catches our attention. And with popular media right now, it's really difficult to bring in something that that is so different as to break from the social norm and the normal way of representing women, of how women are thought about. Lost my train of thought. Anyone else?
I just wanted to touch on what you said on this concept of impact, which was also kind of problematic in my research because I had to prove the impact, so then I decided to not do that. But it's still impacting, and even when I would present to other people and show her images, I would get a mixed set of feedback where some people couldn't watch it because it was just too much, so they didn't want to think about it in general, or they were intrigued, so they wanted to know more. And I think it really depends on the individual and your audience, whether you have images that are striking such as these. And I didn't put any, somebody asked me to put in a corpse of Civil War, and I'm like, it's okay, that was too much. But it's like a juggling act. It's, you have people rejecting it because it's too brutal, or it's too bloody, or people taking it in because they're intrigued and they want to learn more. So, I mean, I don't know. I think that's something that's the individual, and as a person as to giving that information, I feel like I have no power over, because at the end of the day, I'm making that decision to see how it fits me well and what I think the majority. But I just want to say that. Okay.
I don't really have a comment on that.
Sorry, guys, I have a lot of ideas, so I'm going to try to formulate a question real quick from these ideas. So basically, we've focused on how the media has negative, well, not negative, but not a good light for women. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if you guys have any suggestions on whether the media can project a woman in a good light, and if so, what those suggestions are. And I mean, because I feel like it's up to us to take it back. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you agree. So if you guys have any suggestions on what the media shedding good light on women would be.
Well, I guess I can speak in the case of telenovelas, which are very problematic when it comes to representing women and women's sexualities and the absence of queer sexualities. So in terms of maybe improving or becoming more diverse and representing different identities, it might just be a matter of the people who are actually producing these telenovelas and the people who write these storylines. So maybe it's a matter of having more female writers who are open-minded and who aren't afraid to play around with I guess, crazy plot themes or something like that. But I don't know. I'm sure many of you have seen telenovelas from Mexico or other countries. They're very, very scandalous and very melodramatic, and oftentimes women are placed into this marginalized role of like the homemaker, the domestic, or the woman who falls in love with like her Prince Charming. And essentially that is what we see nowadays, and that image hasn't really changed. And in the case of Sin Tatas No Hay Paraíso, it's obviously not about like a homemaker or anything, but Catalina is still being placed in this, I guess, role of a lesser person because she doesn't see herself as having value, or like her body doesn't have value. And even throughout the show, that idea is still kind of reinforced. So there isn't really like a positive outcome to any of her situations. So yeah, I think it's just a matter of who's producing the media and changing those mindsets.
I like what you said about representing multiple and new identities. And one thing that I think is problematic with our modern media in the presentation of women is there's this cookie cutter type, you know? And I mean, it's not very often that you actually see a break from the cookie cutter type. More diverse in just the physical nature of what is a woman, as well as showing more independence. However, I think that the true problem isn't just in the producers, but in this concept of, you know, you're not going to put something out unless there's going to be a demand. Mm-hmm. So it comes down to, again, that question of, is the modern audience a viewer or is it a voyeur? Do you engage with the work because of true interest or personal connection to you? Or do you engage in it on a sensational level because it's enticing in either an eroticized fashion or in something that's like completely different in a way? So it kind of comes down to how the audience is engaging with it, and then if they know that the audience is always going to engage in this certain way, they're going to keep supplying it. It's not going to exactly stop. We're in this propelled motion where it's just going to keep going.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone, for those great questions and responses.